The jarring alien cacophony hit Chloe Devereaux the precise moment her Uber, a sleek black Tesla, turned onto the usually serene oak-lined avenue of Whispering Pines Estates. Estate sale signs, garish, oversized, and offensively yellow and black, were plastered onto every elegant lamppost, pointing with insistent, vulgar fingers towards her house. Her house. A cold, sickening wave of disbelief washed over her so potent it left a distinct metallic taste in her mouth, like fear. Her business trip to Singapore, a grueling but ultimately successful negotiation for her tech startup, had by some miracle ended 2 full days early, a rare stroke of good fortune. She'd decided to surprise Jasper, her fluffy, imperious Persian cat, rather than announce her early return to anyone. Now that fleeting sense of pleasant anticipation had morphed with terrifying speed into a profound, stomach-churning dread. As the Uber pulled smoothly up to her sweeping circular driveway, the scene that unfolded before her was one of pure, unadulterated waking nightmare. Her meticulously manicured lawn, usually a carpet of emerald perfection, was trampled, scarred, and swarming with strangers. An army of them. People complete strangers were casually strolling out of her massive, intricately carved mahogany front door. Her front door, a piece she'd spent months sourcing, carrying, her belongings, her life. A woman she'd never seen before with aggressively styled platinum blonde hair and an air of smug triumph was holding aloft one of her grandmother's priceless Lalique vases, its delicate crystal catching the midday sun. A burly man in a stained t-shirt was struggling, grunting with effort, to maneuver her favorite Eames lounge chair, the one perfectly molded to her body after years of use, towards a waiting battered minivan. Price tags, those obscene little white rectangles of desecration, dangled from every conceivable item. She could see one fluttering from her antique grandfather clock in the foyer, visible even from the curb like a surrender flag. "Stop here, please stop right now," Chloe choked out to the bewildered young Uber driver, her voice a strangled whisper. She threw a handful of crumpled bills onto the passenger seat, her legs already moving, carrying her with a dreamlike, horrifying momentum towards the unfolding catastrophe. It was as if she were watching a film of someone else's life unraveling, except the set was intimately, painfully familiar. Sylvia Thorne, the indomitable Homeowners Association president and self-appointed undisputed queen of Whispering Pines Estates, stood on Chloe's porch as if she owned the very ground it was built on. Dressed in a crisp, impeccably tailored linen suit, the color of expensive champagne, a slim leather clipboard clutched in one perfectly manicured hand and a portable credit card reader in the other, she was beaming with proprietorial satisfaction at a middle-aged couple who were animatedly haggling over a Ming Dynasty replica side table. Chloe's Ming Dynasty replica side table, a gift from her late father. "Sylvia, what in the absolute hell do you think you are doing?" Chloe's voice, raw with shocked disbelief and a rising tide of uncontrollable fury, cut through the chattering, bargain-hunting crowd like a whip crack. Sylvia Thorne turned, her practiced smile faltering for a mere microsecond, a tiny, almost imperceptible flicker in her cold, assessing eyes before it snapped back into a patronizing, overly sweet beam. "Chloe, darling, you're back early. Such a surprise. We weren't expecting you for another 2 days. Just tidying up a few things for you, dear. You know how clutter can accumulate when one travels so frequently." Her voice was syrupy, condescending. Tidying up, Chloe gestured wildly, her hand trembling at a man who was now attempting with considerable difficulty to stuff her priceless silk Persian rug, a family heirloom carried across continents, into the already overflowing trunk of his beat-up sedan. "This isn't tidying up, Sylvia. This is grand larceny. This is a robbery. You're selling my entire house out from under me." A ripple of unease, then distinct discomfort went through the assembled crowd of bargain hunters. Some paused mid-transaction items, clutched guiltily to their chests. Others looked from Chloe's pale, furious face to Sylvia's carefully composed one, confusion, then suspicion dawning in their eyes. The woman with the Lalique vase suddenly looked as if she wished the manicured lawn would open up and swallow her whole. Sylvia's smile tightened the warmth, vanishing completely, her eyes turning to chips of glacial ice. "Now, Chloe, let's not be overly dramatic. You and I discussed this quite thoroughly before you left for your extended trip. You explicitly said you wanted to downsize, that the upkeep of this grand old place was becoming far too much for a single woman always on the go. You authorized me in writing to handle the estate dispersal in your absence, to liquidate the assets efficiently. What Chloe's jaw literally dropped. The sheer unmitigated audacity of the lie stole her breath. That is an absolute contemptible lie. Sylvia, I never ever said any such thing. I love this house. These are my cherished possessions. My life. Her voice rose, hysteria bubbling dangerously close to the surface, her carefully cultivated professional composure shattering like fragile glass. She'd bought this sprawling, historic mansion with the first major payout from her wildly successful tech startup. It was a symbol of her hard-won independence, her triumph over adversity, a sanctuary from the relentless, often brutal demands of her high-stakes career. She traveled frequently. Yes, it was a necessity of her job, but her roots, her heart, were firmly planted here in this house, in this community. Sylvia, who lived in a much smaller, though impeccably maintained, aggressively modern house further down the street, had always been just a bit too interested in Chloe's comings and goings, her travel schedule, the contents of her home. She often made thinly veiled, snide comments about such a large, underutilized property for just one person, and the moral importance of utilizing substantial assets for broader community benefit. These comments were usually followed by a not-so-subtle suggestion that Chloe host the next lavish HOA fundraiser, or perhaps donate a significant piece to the community center's art auction. Chloe had always politely but firmly demurred a fact that clearly irked the HOA president. I think Sylvia said, her voice dripping with false saccharine concern, pitched loud enough for the surrounding, now avidly listening crowd to hear clearly that the considerable stress of your international travels, perhaps some jet lag, has unfortunately confused you, dear. It happens to the best of us. She then snapped her fingers with imperious authority. Security. Two burly, menacing men in generic black security t-shirts, men Chloe had never seen before in her life. Men who looked more like nightclub bouncers. The neighborhood watch immediately detached themselves from the edge of the porch and moved purposefully, threateningly towards her. One of them had a nasty, fresh scar tracing his jawline. The other cracked his knuckles, a deliberate, intimidating sound. "Don't you dare touch me." Chloe backed away, her heart pounding, a primal fear kicking in. This was escalating far too quickly. This is my house. These people are trespassing. You are stealing from me. Sylvia, this is a crime. Sylvia sighed dramatically, a theatrical exhalation of put upon patience. It seems Miss Devereaux is having an episode, a rather severe one. I'm afraid for her own safety and the safety of others, I'm going to have to call for professional assistance. She pulled out her sleek, expensive smartphone, her fingers already dialing with practiced speed. Yes, 911 emergency. Her voice was now laced with carefully modulated alarm. I'm at 12 Oak Haven Drive, Whispering Pines Estates. We have an intruder, a woman clearly disturbed, possibly under the influence, claiming to own the property. She's becoming increasingly agitated and aggressive. Please send officers immediately. I fear she may become violent. Chloe stared, aghast, speechless. The sheer, unmitigated, diabolical gall of the woman was breathtaking, calling the police on the actual homeowner in their own home while actively, brazenly robbing them blind in broad daylight. It was surreal. It was insane. The crowd was now murmuring loudly, a wave of consternation and fear rippling through them. Many were starting to back away, abandoning their plundered goods, sensing a situation rapidly spiraling out of control, a situation they wanted no part of. The man with the Persian rug abruptly dropped it onto the driveway, a cloud of dust rising, and scurried towards his car engine, roaring to life. The woman with the lilac vase, her face now crimson with embarrassment and fear, carefully placed it on a nearby garden bench and made a hasty retreat. The wait for the police was simultaneously an agonizing eternity and a terrifyingly short sprint towards an unknown confrontation. Chloe stood her ground on her porch, refusing to be intimidated further, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She watched as Sylvia, with an air of martyred duty, directed her ersatz security guards to keep a very close eye on her. She might be a runner or attempt to harm herself or others. Every fiber of Chloe's being screamed to physically attack Sylvia, to rip the smug, condescending mask from her face, to reclaim her home by force. But a small, cold, rational core of her brain, the part that had built a tech empire from nothing, urged caution. Let the police come. Let the truth, however unbelievable, come out. Surely the system, the law, wouldn't fail her this catastrophically. Surely. 2 police cruisers, sirens, wailing lights flashing, arrived with alarming speed, their arrival momentarily silencing the entire chaotic neighborhood. Officers Peterson and Davies, their expressions calm, professional, and carefully assessing, stepped out of their respective vehicles. Officer Peterson was older, seasoned with tired eyes that had seen too much. Davies was younger, more athletic, his gaze sharp and observant. Sylvia Thorne, the consummate actress, rushed towards them, her face a mask of harried concern and civic duty. "Oh, thank goodness you're here, officers." This woman, she pointed a dramatic accusing finger at Chloe, just appeared out of nowhere, ranting and raving, claiming this is her house. She's very agitated, possibly dangerous. "I am hosting an authorized estate sale for the true owner, a Miss Chloe Devereaux, who is currently overseas on an extended sabbatical and has formally authorized me as HOA president and her trusted friend to liquidate her assets." Officer Peterson, his gaze steady, turned to Chloe. "Ma'am, can you please tell us your name?" "My name is Chloe Elizabeth Devereaux," she said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to remain calm to project authority. "This is my house. My legal residence. I just returned unexpectedly from a business trip to Singapore. This woman, Sylvia Thorne, is the president of our Homeowners Association, and she is illegally selling all of my belongings without my knowledge or permission. She has in effect staged a home invasion under the guise of an estate sale." Sylvia scoffed, a sound of pure derision. "Officers, she's clearly delusional, unstable. I have all the necessary paperwork right here. Signed authorizations, power of attorney documents, everything perfectly in order, all from Miss Devereaux herself." She patted her leather clipboard with an air of unshakable confidence. "May I see that paperwork, ma'am?" Officer Davies asked Sylvia, his tone neutral, non-committal, but his eyes were keen, missing nothing of the rapidly unfolding drama. Chloe interjected, her mind racing desperately, trying to find a lifeline in this maelstrom of insanity. "Officer, before she shows you any undoubtedly forged documents, please, I implore you. I have a new doorbell camera system, state of the art. I installed it myself just before I left for my trip. It records everyone who comes to the front door, every interaction, and it's all cloud-based, time-stamped, and tamper-proof. It would have recorded me leaving for my trip, and it certainly would have recorded me authorizing an estate sale of this magnitude if such a fantastical conversation ever actually happened. Which I assure you, it absolutely did not. And the associated app, linked to my secure cloud storage, contains digital copies of the deed to this house, clearly in my name, Chloe Elizabeth Devereaux. My property tax records my passport, my driver's license. Everything that proves my identity and ownership is right here." Sylvia's carefully constructed composure flickered. Just for a fleeting second, a shadow of something akin to raw panic, or perhaps just extreme irritation, crossed her aristocratic features before being ruthlessly, instantly suppressed. A doorbell camera. Her voice was a little too bright, a little too dismissive. "Well, I'm sure that's very nice, Chloe dear, a lovely little hobby. But I have legally binding notarized documents here. Actual paper. Far more reliable than some gadget. Let's see that footage." Miss Devereaux, Officer Peterson said, his gaze sharp, cutting through Sylvia's bluster. He gestured for Chloe to proceed. Chloe fumbled for her phone, her fingers shaking so badly she almost dropped the expensive device. She pulled up the security app, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The Wi-Fi, thank God, connected instantly. She navigated with trembling fingers to the event log, praying it hadn't been wiped or disabled. There it was, her own departure from 3 weeks ago, clearly visible, struggling slightly with her oversized luggage, locking the front door behind her. And then, a horrifying chronicle of the subsequent days, Sylvia Thorne coming and going from her property with alarming frequency, often accompanied by unknown, shifty-looking individuals. Footage of them measuring rooms, pointing at furniture, tagging items. There was even crystal-clear, damning footage from just 2 days ago of a locksmith hired by Sylvia brazenly, changing her front door lock. The sheer calculated effrontery of it made Chloe feel a fresh wave of nauseating violation. This wasn't an impulsive act. This was premeditated. Here, Chloe said, her voice hoarse, raw, with emotion, turning the phone screen so Officer Peterson could see clearly. This is me leaving for Singapore. And these are all the recorded events since. Sylvia Thorne trespassing repeatedly. And here in the app's secure linked cloud storage is a digital copy of my notarized deed, my current property tax records, my passport, my global entry card. Everything. Officer Peterson watched the selected footage intently, his expression unreadable. He then took the phone from Chloe's trembling hand and scrolled carefully through the stored documents, his brow furrowed in concentration. He exchanged a long, significant look with Officer Davies. Davies gave a barely perceptible nod. Mrs. Thorne, Officer Peterson, said, his voice now devoid of any warmth, any deference, replaced by a cold, official firmness. This digital footage and these authenticated documents clearly unequivocally indicate that Miss Chloe Devereaux is, in fact, the legal and current owner of this property. Can you please explain to us why you are hosting an estate sale of her belongings without her apparent consent, and why you took it upon yourself to change the locks on her private residence? Sylvia's face, which had been slowly losing its healthy color, was now a pasty, unhealthy white. Her lips trembled slightly. There must be some mistake, a terrible misunderstanding. Chloe, dear, you simply must remember our detailed conversation about your desire to simplify your life. There was no conversation. Sylvia, Chloe exclaimed, her voice ringing with righteous fury. You are a thief, a con artist, and a pathological liar. Ma'am, Officer Davies said sternly to Sylvia, his hand now resting pointedly on the butt of his service weapon, a subtle but clear shift in his demeanor. We're going to need you to accompany us to the station to sort this out. Now, sort this out. Sylvia's voice rose to a shrill, incredulous shriek. Her composure finally spectacularly shattered. I am the victim here. She's the one who's confused, unstable, a trespasser. I am the president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. I am a respected member of this community. I have rights. That may be, Ma'am, Officer Peterson, said, his voice flat, as he smoothly, efficiently pulled out a pair of gleaming handcuffs. But right now, you're under arrest for suspicion of grand larceny, residential burglary, forgery, and filing a false police report. You have the right to remain silent. The sharp, distinct click of the handcuffs ratcheting shut around Sylvia Thorne's elegantly thin wrists was, Chloe thought, the most deeply, profoundly satisfying sound she had ever heard in her entire life. The color completely drained from Sylvia's face, replaced by a look of utter, uncomprehending shock, which quickly morphed into dawning, abject terror as the reality of her situation began to penetrate her arrogant facade. Her reign was over. The next few hours were a chaotic, surreal blur of police interviews, detailed statements, and the monumental, heartbreaking task of trying to halt the illegal sale and recover what had already been pilfered and driven away. Officers Peterson and Davies, now assisted by several more units, fanned out through the neighborhood, stopping cars that were leaving the vicinity of Chloe's house laden with suspicious goods, explaining the bizarre, unfolding situation. Most of the buyers, when confronted with the reality that they were in possession of stolen property, were shocked, embarrassed, and immediately compliant. They returned the items, provided their contact details for eventual refunds that would presumably have to come from Sylvia Thorne's assets if she possessed any legitimate ones. A sharp, no-nonsense detective, a woman named Diaz, with tired eyes and an air of seen-it-all cynicism, arrived to take over the complex investigation from the initial responding officers. It was Detective Diaz who, after a preliminary consent-based search of Sylvia's surprisingly modest and somewhat cluttered home, conducted with a hastily obtained telephonic search warrant once the sheer scale and audacity of the attempted theft became chillingly clear, uncovered the first grubby layer of the HOA president's desperate, unraveling life. Sylvia Thorne wasn't just a power-hungry, meddling busybody with a penchant for control. She was, it turned out, drowning in a deep, dark sea of debt. Detective Diaz's team found stacks of gambling slips from high-stakes underground poker games threatening crudely worded letters from unlicensed loan sharks and official notices of impending foreclosure on her own much smaller house. It quickly became apparent that Sylvia had been systematically brazenly embezzling funds from the Whispering Pines HOA's coffers for months, possibly years. Small, cleverly disguised amounts at first, then larger, more reckless, more desperate withdrawals as her financial situation worsened. The full-scale estate sale of Chloe's lavish mansion, Diaz surmised, was clearly a wild, desperate Hail Mary pass, a shockingly audacious, almost theatrical attempt to score big pay off her pressing debts and perhaps disappear before the entire house of cards came crashing down. She has a history, Miss Devereaux Detective Diaz explained later that evening, her tone grim as they sat in Chloe's ransacked living room, surrounded by the chaotic remnants of the aborted sale. Not on this spectacular scale, nothing this flamboyant, but we're finding a disturbing pattern. Mismanaged charity drives for the Community Beautification Fund, where most of the alleged beauty and certainly most of the funds ended up directly in her personal bank account. We even found a partially completed password-protected file on her seized laptop. It seems to detail a rather nefarious plan to systematically undervalue certain financially delinquent properties within the HOA, then acquire them cheaply through a series of anonymous shell corporations she controlled presumably to flip them for a quick, substantial profit. Diaz paused her gaze, sweeping over the disordered opulence of Chloe's home. Yours, it seems, wasn't intended for flipping, Miss Devereaux. Given the urgency of her debts, this was clearly for immediate total asset stripping, a fire sale of everything that wasn't nailed down. As the complex investigation deepened over the following days and weeks, a second more chilling and sinister layer to Sylvia's motivations began to emerge thanks to Diaz's relentless digging. One of the loan sharks, Sylvia was heavily indebted to a particularly nasty, violent character, well known to law enforcement for his brutality, had apparently given Sylvia a final non-negotiable deadline. Encrypted emails and text messages recovered from Sylvia's seized devices suggested she had specifically promised this dangerous individual certain high-value, easily transportable items from Chloe's extensive collection, not just cash, but particular antiques jewelry and several rare artworks. It was almost as if these specific items had been pre-ordered, selected from a macabre shopping list. This wasn't just about Sylvia clearing her mounting gambling debts. It was about appeasing dangerous, ruthless people who wouldn't hesitate to use extreme violence to collect what they were owed. Sylvia hadn't just been greedy and arrogant. She'd been terrified, pushed into a corner. And that profound terror, it seemed, had driven her to an act of spectacular, almost performative criminality. Chloe realized, with a cold, sickening shudder, that Sylvia's palpable desperation could easily have escalated into something far worse, far more violent, if she'd been confronted by someone less capable of instantly proving their identity and ownership so decisively, or if the police hadn't arrived so promptly. Those security guards Sylvia had hired were not ordinary rent-a-cops. Diaz discovered they were known associates of the loan shark. Their instructions might have been far more brutal if Chloe had been alone and unable to summon help. The Whispering Pines Homeowners Association was thrown into utter, unprecedented chaos. An emergency board meeting was called, held in a tense, somber atmosphere. Chloe, exhausted, emotionally drained, but resolute and filled with a cold anger, attended accompanied by a newly hired formidable lawyer. The remaining board members, a collection of flustered, embarrassed, and mostly well-meaning individuals, offered profuse, heartfelt apologies. Some, it transpired, had harbored growing suspicions about Sylvia's increasingly erratic behavior, her secretive financial dealings, and her surprisingly lavish personal spending, but had been too intimidated by her forceful personality, or perhaps too complacent and unwilling to rock the boat to challenge her authority directly. The HOA's insurance company was immediately contacted, and their own lawyers were engaged. The reputational damage to the exclusive, usually tranquil enclave was immense, the scandal quickly becoming fodder for local news and gossip columns. The painstaking process of recovering Chloe's stolen belongings was arduous, emotionally draining, and infuriating. Some items were traced to local pawn shops, their owners claiming ignorance. Others had simply vanished, likely already sold on the black market, or spirited away by Sylvia's more organized accomplices before the police intervened. Each empty space in her once beautifully appointed home, each missing treasure, was a fresh stab of violation, a painful reminder of the audacity of Sylvia's crime. She had to meticulously catalog everything that was missing, provide receipts, photographs, and detailed proof of ownership for insurance purposes, and deal with a stream of skeptical insurance adjusters and police detectives. Jasper, her fluffy, usually aloof Persian cat, who had thankfully been found by Officer Davies cowering deep under Chloe's massive four-poster bed, traumatized but unharmed, became her constant, comforting shadow, rarely leaving her side. The legal hammer came down hard and deservedly so on Sylvia Thorne. Faced with the overwhelming, irrefutable evidence, the crystal-clear doorbell camera footage, the testimony of the locksmith she'd hired to illegally change Chloe's locks, the stacks of forged documents she'd meticulously prepared, the sworn statements of the duped estate sale buyers, her own incriminating financial records, and the damning evidence of her systematic embezzlement and her nefarious dealings with dangerous criminals, she had absolutely no viable defense. The district attorney, personally incensed by her brazenness, her utter lack of remorse, and the sheer audacious scale of the attempted heist, took a particular interest in the case, ensuring it was prosecuted vigorously. He stacked up the charges: grand larceny of the first-degree residential burglary with aggravating circumstances, multiple counts of forgery and wire fraud, felony embezzlement, and filing a false police report leading to unlawful restraint. The final indictment listed indeed 10 serious felony charges. In the end, after a short, highly publicized trial, where Sylvia's attempts to portray herself as a misunderstood victim fell spectacularly flat, she was found guilty on all counts by a jury that deliberated for less than an hour. Her remaining personal assets were seized by the court to begin the long process of paying restitution to Chloe and the heavily defrauded HOA. She received a lengthy, substantial prison sentence, her ignominious reign as the self-appointed queen and terror of Whispering Pines ending not with a whimper, but with the resounding final clang of a cold steel jail cell door. The dangerous loan shark she'd been desperately trying to appease was also eventually arrested on a slew of unrelated racketeering charges. Several months later, his criminal enterprise dismantled his leverage over Sylvia and countless others evaporating into the ether. Detective Diaz made sure to personally inform Chloe. Chloe, with the unwavering support of close friends, a dedicated team of art restorers and private art recovery specialists, and her ever-present feline companion, Jasper, slowly, painstakingly began to put her home and her shattered life back together. She installed a formidable new cutting-edge security system complete with thermal motion sensors, reinforced doors and windows, and direct panic button lines to both a private security firm and the local police department. She was taking no more chances. The Whispering Pines HOA, now under new, more responsible and thoroughly vetted leadership, implemented stringent new financial controls, mandatory ethics training for all board members, and transparent oversight procedures. Some residents, deeply ashamed of the scandal that had rocked their privileged enclave, quietly sold their homes and moved away. Others, like Chloe, chose to stay determined to rebuild not just their homes, but their community on a stronger, more honest foundation of integrity and mutual respect. Months later, standing in her beautifully restored living room, warm afternoon sunlight streaming generously through the large, leaded glass bay windows, Chloe ran a gentle hand over the smoothly polished antique surface of her grandmother's beloved mahogany writing desk, one of the first precious items she had miraculously managed to recover, found hidden in the back of an unscrupulous antique dealer's warehouse. It bore a new, almost invisible scratch near one of its intricately carved legs, a tiny, almost imperceptible scar from its traumatic ordeal. Like her home, like herself, it was subtly changed, forever marked by the violation, but it had endured. It had survived. The peace she felt now in the quiet sanctuary of her reclaimed home was different than before. Less naive, perhaps less innocent, but far more profound, more resilient. She had faced down a monstrous, almost unbelievable violation of her sanctuary, her privacy, and her trust, and she had not only survived, but had emerged stronger, more self-aware. Her roots in her beloved home, paradoxically deepened and strengthened by the very audacious attempt to tear them out. The silence of her grand mansion was no longer just quiet. It was the resonant, satisfying sound of hard-won victory, of fiercely reclaimed serenity of justice, ultimately and beautifully served.